Good afternoon. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to our session today on emergency preparedness. I'm so glad that you could join us here live for the session, or if you are watching this recording afterwards, welcome, bienvenue. Today, we're going to go through and be talking about how to prepare yourself for an emergency, and it's going to be different for each person. There are some central things that we'll go through that will be the same for every person, regardless of where you are posted across Europe, some of the things that you're going to need to do to prepare. And then we're also going to be talking about our emergency plans, and that will, of course, be unique to you depending on where you're located. So for emergency preparedness, a quote to start us off that we need to kind of seal in our hearts here is that we can't predict when an emergency or disaster may occur, but we can take the necessary steps to prepare for it. And that is one of the biggest messages that I want you to walk away from today. Is a lot of times when we're talking about emergency preparedness, people can get nervous or feel concerned when we start talking about potential threats or potential emergency situations that we might face. But the important thing to remember is we can prepare these things. We can't help it if something's going to happen. If we live in an area where it's prone to floods or an area where there are volcanoes, we can't control those things, but we can do a lot to prepare ourselves so that we are able to effectively respond in the event that something like that does happen. MFS Europe is not affiliated with any of the companies, apps, or products named in the presentation, and they're not sponsored by, does not sponsor or endorse any of the companies, apps, products named in the presentation. So I want to put an acknowledgement out, first of all, a special thanks to the American Red Cross Naples Service to the Armed Forces for the training, support, and their tireless service. I would not be able to give you this presentation today if it wasn't for the American Red Cross Naples. I'm here located in Brussels now, but prior to this, we were posted to Naples, Italy for 3 years. And during my time there, I had the privilege of working with the American Red Cross on the disaster action team. A huge thanks to them, because a lot of the material from today was learned through the work that we did together. So when we're talking about preparing for an emergency or disaster, it's important, even though everyone might think, yeah, I know what an emergency is or a disaster, it's important that we really look at all of the things that could be encompassed in that. So for example, an emergency is defined as an unforeseen combination of circumstances or the resulting state that calls for immediate action. Or another one, an urgent need for assistance or relief. Whereas a disaster, an occurrence causing widespread destruction and distress, a catastrophe, or a grave misfortune. So those two situations are quite different, and it's important that we take note of this when we're talking about preparing for an emergency or disaster. A lot of times people will think, oh, well, the likelihood of a disaster happening to me is very unlikely. You know, I don't live near a volcano. There's not a lot of floods where I am. I don't think I really need to prepare an emergency bag. But when we start to think about what an emergency is, an unforeseen combination of circumstances, that is really something that can impact you anywhere. If there was a storm and you lost power to your home and it was in the middle of winter and you don't have electricity, or something happens and you're stuck in your home and you don't have access to water, those are all things that technically could happen anywhere, and it is an emergency situation. So it is really important for us to understand that we're not just preparing for these grand catastrophic events, we're also preparing for other emergencies which can cause us to be in discomfort or in a potentially dangerous situation. So when we're talking about preparing for an emergency or disaster, the most common weather-related disaster incidents in Europe, and this is according to information from 2023, as you can see from the presentation, floods, wildfires, storms, and extreme temperatures. So that's when we're looking at Europe as a whole. Now, for people who are posted here, who are living here, who fall under our MFS Europe umbrella, there are obviously different circumstances that you're going to be facing depending on where you're posted to. Obviously, there's a lot of different countries that we could be speaking about, but two examples that I've given here in Italy. So we were there, we lived there, so we knew firsthand what some of the threats were, but earthquakes and volcanoes are a potential threat for families in Naples. And there's been a significant increase in activity this past year. And there are a number of, for people who are living posted directly in Naples it's not just one area, it's in multiple areas where there's volcanic activity. So that is something when they are preparing for a disaster emergency that is a real threat that they need to consider. I was speaking with another individual, and they had been in Romania, and they spoke about earthquakes being a potential issue there. And due to that and the lack of road infrastructure, that could potentially hamper your evacuation. So another thing that you need to consider when you're planning an evacuation route, if there's not good road infrastructure, that's going to impact you. So these are things that are important to be looking at. And then also there are a number of non-weather related potential threats. There are cyber attacks, which can impact your life in different ways. Obviously a very unfortunate situation, but potential terrorist attacks. We did have a situation in Brussels where they weren't sure. This was about, I think, 2 months ago now, but people were told to stay in their homes until the situation was under control. So these are things that can potentially happen. And then of course, war. And for some people that are posted, depending where you are geographically, those things can be more of a concern. So when we talk about this, we don't talk about this to try to instill fear in people, but rather the point is to try to help people become aware that there are a whole host of different things that we need to be aware about. And we need to think about, where are we posted right now? Where are you located in Europe? And what are the potential risks for you there? Do you know the potential risks? Because in order to plan for the risks, you need to know what they are. So I'm going to do a little exercise with you here, and we're going to look at doing a self-check with ourselves if we feel that we are prepared. So the scenario I'm going to give you is, you imagine that you're at home and you're awoken in the middle of the night by an alert that there's an impending, and you can insert here what you think would be relevant to where you are in Italy, an impending volcanic eruption, maybe located somewhere else, an impending flood. So think about what would be relevant to your area. So you receive the alert and you need to evacuate yourself and your family and your pets immediately. Are you prepared? Where are your emergency backpacks, and are they easily accessible? Do you have 3 days of food and water? Do you have supplies for your pets? Do you have all of your necessary documents? Do you have adequate clothing for the current temperatures? Do you have the necessary medicine for you and your family? Do you have multiple routes to choose from to get to your designated location for shelter in case of traffic or unsafe roads or bridges? Where is your designated location that you need to go to? Do you have enough gas in your car? Or if you have an electric vehicle, is your battery charged? So when we're looking at this, excuse me, at this list here, we need to really think, are we prepared? Were you able to answer yes confidently to all of those questions? If you were able to answer yes confidently, that's amazing. And you're doing a great job and you are ready. If you weren't able to answer yes to all of those questions, then great news, you're here today. And that's why we're here together, to help you do what you need to become prepared. So that's the good news for you. So again, we can't predict when an emergency or disaster may occur, but we can take the necessary steps to prepare for it. So when we're talking about steps to being prepared, as I mentioned before, people, when they start to recognize these potential emergencies or disasters, many people can find that they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling anxious, it's becoming a stress for them because they don't feel like they are really prepared to face them. But when you start to think, okay, I need an emergency kit, I need an emergency plan, you have that knowledge, but that as well can start to feel overwhelming because people don't always know, okay, where do I start? How much money is this going to cost? Is this something I can do on my own? So again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I want you to take a deep breath and rest assured that there are definitely easy steps that you can take today when you leave from this session to create and be prepared for potential emergencies and disasters. So we're going to go through 3 different sections. There's a few different items per section, but the first thing we're going to talk about is getting, so you can purchase, or building your kit. The second thing we're going to talk about is making your emergency response plan. And the third thing we're going to talk about is being informed. So when we're talking about building or purchasing emergency kits, the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what type of emergency kits do I need? And the first one that we're going to go over is a portable emergency kit. And a portable emergency kit is also sometimes called a go bag. That's another word for that. We're going to be speaking about our home emergency kit, which is the kit that not one that you take with you in the event of emergency, but one that is going to stay in your home in case you are stranded there. And then we're going to speak about your car emergency kit, which is a really important kit that sometimes is overlooked. So we're going to talk about the portable emergency kit. As I mentioned, it's known as a go bag sometimes. This is what you're going to grab and carry with you as you evacuate your home in the case of an emergency or disaster. It's important here, you have to carry it. This is important. So we need to be thinking about how we can pack it to be prepared, but also making sure that we're able to carry it with us and that we're adapting it if we have a physical limitation. So you'll see here on the presentation, this is just a stock photo here of an example of a portable emergency kit. There are lots of different organizations that sell these. The Red Cross sells them in different countries. So the portable emergency kit should be accessible within your home so you can quickly grab it to evacuate. And this is one thing, if you have your emergency kit and you're prepared already and you just got posted and you move somewhere new and you have it in your basement in a bin, it's not going to be useful to you there in the event of an emergency. One of the places that you should have it is near to the door or in close vicinity to the door where you would be evacuating from, because in the event of an emergency or a disaster, when you need to leave your home, the last thing that you want to do is start to be getting concerned or looking around or trying to find things. Everything needs to be in there ready to go. You need to grab it and leave. And the important thing here too is that you need to have an emergency bag for each member of your family. Now, obviously, I have young children. My children are 5 and 9. So what they would have in their emergency kit is going to look a little bit different than what adults would have. So we're going to go over in detail what you're going to need, but that is something to know too. If you have kids that are strong enough to carry a school backpack, you can make them an emergency kit. So they need one as well, so that each person has what they need to be prepared. So when we're going over this, the first thing we want to look at is water. You need 1 gallon per person per day. And so when you're looking at your go bag, at your emergency bag, it's advised that you have a 3-day supply. The second thing we have on our list is food. So non-perishable, easy to prepare items. And again, we're going to need a 3-day supply for evacuation. So when we're talking about food, you can see in the image here, they have some canned food, the person has some crackers, they've got some nuts, they have different things. It's important in the event of an emergency when you're thinking of packing this food, especially if you have I guess, require special dietary requirements, but also if you have children or teenagers, it's important when you're packing their bag that you're thinking about food that they actually would eat. So I know sometimes people would say, well, obviously if it's in an emergency, we should just eat whatever we can, whatever's provided. But anyone who has children, grown or small, knows that if you pack food that they don't want to eat, that's going to make a potentially stressful situation even more stressful. So it's when you're looking at your bag, it's okay that when you're thinking about, what non-perishable items I'm putting in my bag, maybe it's going to be different what you're packing for your children than what you're packing for adults. So thinking of things that are going to be healthy, that are going to sustain you, that are going to be easy to keep in there. Many people do choose to keep stuff that's in a tin. Obviously, you can see the tins here. They don't need a can opener in that bag. All the tins are easily, because they have the little top on it where you can peel it back. You need to be thinking about, okay, what am I bringing if I'm bringing this with me and it's, not that I'm advertising it, but like Chef Boyardee in a tin or something. Am I going to eat that cold? Is my kid going to eat it cold? Pack stuff that you know that you can eat, just so that when you are there in that situation, you're going to want to eat what you have prepared. So obviously a flashlight, a battery powered or hand crank radio. And they also do sell hand crank flashlights too. We purchased ours in Canada. I'm sure you can probably get that online here, but that is handy when you don't want to worry about the batteries. But if you do have a battery flashlight, extra batteries are important. A first aid kit, these are very easy to get online. You can even get them in the grocery stores, the mini first aid kit, that's important to have in there. Medications is something that people don't always think of packing. So obviously, your regular acetaminophen or ibuprofen, things like that. But also, if you have specific medication that you need and it's important for you to take, and in the event that you had to evacuate quickly, it's important that you have that medication in your bag, that you're not running upstairs to your medicine cabinet to be packing those items. A multi-purpose tool is great. So Swiss Army knife or something like that, in case you're going to be needing to use that. And those can be very compact. Sanitation and personal hygiene items. You can purchase online little packs. And I know for those of us who are posted near where there's a commissary, like a US base where they have the necks or the commissary, you can purchase often in those locations little bags. They're small and they have they're basically travel hygiene bags. So it has all of the small items that you would need that are in there. So that's great. But they have an example here. They have some sanitary pads, some tampons, and then, soap, all sorts of different things. So it's important to have, have those things available. They've put some toilet paper in there. Great thing to bring with you. So number 10, we're looking at copies of personal documents and keys. So on the topic of documents, that's something that people don't always think about when they're looking at their go bags or their portable emergency kits. But your personal documents are very important. So if an emergency happens, there is a good chance, maybe you have to evacuate and you're going to be able to come back to your home and you're saying, okay, well, that's no problem. I'm going to come back to my home and all my things will be there. But that's not always something we want to rely on. Sometimes if we have to evacuate in the case of an emergency, we may not be able to go back to our house at all because of destruction of your house, if it was flooding or something like that. In some circumstances, and these are all examples, thanks to the Red Cross and our time there, but that they had shared in their training. There's times when there are significant disasters that happen where people's homes get looted after and they're not able to access. Their things are not there anymore after some sort of disaster. Or if you're just not able to get back there for a prolonged period of time, there are documents that you're going to want to have. So important to always have those photocopies of your passports, proof of address. They do recommend through the Red Cross of having a copy of your deed or your lease, copies of insurance, copies of birth certificates, having all of those things. I know a lot of people do use cloud storage that they can use to protect their information and have it available online, but also having that information available to you and safeguarded, and having that so that if you do have to leave the house quickly, you have the identification and everything that you need. Also having a spare set of keys is also recommended for your vehicle or for your house in the event that you're not able to get that before you leave your house. Cell phones with chargers is important. Obviously, you can have your charger that you're using, to plug into the vehicle or to plug in at another location, but also external battery packs are a great option to have to be having in your emergency go bag, because then if you're not able to get somewhere where you can plug in, you have the option to be keeping that connection on your phone in that situation. And then, of course, your family and emergency contact information. If for some reason you didn't have your phone or something else, you have a copy of all that information there. So this is not, believe it or not, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the main things that are very important that you have in your portable emergency kits. Also, emergency blankets. When you have a backpack, you are a little bit limited, but the emergency blanket we're talking about here is the small, tiny blanket. It looks like a foil blanket. You'll see sometimes in different response situations, you'll see people are there and they're wrapped up in it. They're small, they're portable. It's a great thing to be able to have with you to be able to protect you until you're able to get somewhere warm. And then the last thing on the list, maps of the area. We all basically rely most of the time now on our on our phones, I think a lot of the time. But to have a map of the area is also an important thing in the event that you are not able to access the information, or if the cell towers are down and you're not able to get data on your phone. So when we're talking about the family specific items for a portable emergency kit, as I mentioned before, individual medical supplies, so hearing aids, glasses, contact lenses, contact lens solution. It seems a little bit exhausting to think of all of these things, but you don't ever want to be in a situation where, you've left the house and you're in contact lenses and you don't have glasses and you don't have contact lens solution. These are things we're going to need if that's something that is part of your medical need. If you have a baby, making sure you have those baby supplies, you have the bottles, formula, baby food, diapers, all of that you have at least for 3 days. And number 3, games and activities for children. And again, sometimes people may think, oh, why would I want to have games or activities for children when I'm in an emergency? Is that really an important thing to have? But it is really important for us to have in the pack, because if you're there in an emergency situation and children are feeling stressed and anxious about what's going on, having something to occupy them in that time is really going to help you to be able to focus on what you need to do. And that's, again, with number 4, a comfort item. It's along the same lines there, making sure that there is something that you can have for your kids to help them feel calm and to occupy their mind in that situation. So a special note on pets. Your animals need their own portable emergency kit. You know, everyone is different. Not everybody has animals here when they're posted out can, but I know many of us do. For us, ourselves, we have 2 cats we rescued from Italy, and they need to be having their own portable emergency kit. Obviously, unless your animal's really well trained, they're not going to have their own backpack, but you need to be prepared for them. So I've got a list here. And again, it's not exhaustive. You might think of something else based on your animal that they would need. But for each pet, you need to have a carrier or a kennel. So you might say, well, my dog is really great and my dog is really great on a leash. But really, you need to be thinking about where are you going to have to, if in the event that there is something more catastrophic and you have to evacuate to a location where maybe you're going to, a rec center and you're going to be sheltering in a rec center, or wherever it is, your pet might not be able to be loose. And you need to be able to keep them safe for their own safety and for the safety of others. So it's recommended that you have a carrier or kennel for each animal, that you have a collar and a leash for transport. You have a copy of your animal's documents. You have pet food for at least 3 days, water for at least 3 days, and again, bowls for food and water. It's really easy. Again, I got mine at the commissary in Naples, but you can actually get collapsible silicone food and water dishes for animals. So they go down really, really flat. Those are great. They're really easy to pack in there. Again, any necessary medication for your pet. and something to keep your pet entertained. As many pet owners know, if you have a dog, a bored dog or a stressed dog, that's not going to make the situation easier, or a stressed cat. So making sure that you have something for them to help keep them entertained. Now, for people who, for example, if you're in Naples and you were going to be evacuating and you were going to go to support site there, in situations like that, if that were somewhere you might be evacuating to, you're going to need to have the proof of your animal's documents for sure in order to even get on the base. And I know there, when they shelter, their emergency plan when they're sheltering people there, is that the pets are going to be separated from the owners, which is why you absolutely 100% have to have the carrier, or your animal can't be there. So you need to be thinking about, when we talk about where you might be going in the event of an emergency, where you'd be evacuating to, where that location is, and if they would have any additional requirements for your animal to come with you. So the second thing under the first topic here of get and build your kits is looking at a home emergency kit. So here, the picture I've just shown a stock photo here for a small home emergency kit, but this really is up to you how big or small you want to make it. My coworker, Martha, who I showed a picture of at the beginning, she had the big military kits that they usually have military equipment in. She had one that was about that size, and they had a family of 5 that she was preparing for. So she had quite a large kit, but again, it depends on your family and obviously your space. If you're in an apartment, how much space you have to keep it. So again, your home emergency kit, it needs to be stored in a safe place where you can easily access it in the event of an emergency or disaster. So it doesn't need to be at the front door, obviously, or near the front door like your portable kit or your go bag. But you do need to have it somewhere where you can easily access it. So, if you're living in an area in Europe where you might be facing an earthquake or could potentially face an earthquake, having it with a lot of other stuff on top of it in your garage might not be the best place for it. You need to think about, if something were to happen, can I quickly, or can I easily access this kit? And you're only going to need one of these kits. It's going to need to be prepared for all of the members of your family, including your pets, but you only need one home emergency kit. So I've put the list here, again, for the home emergency kit. So when you're looking at this, you're going to see it's essentially the same as the list for the portable one, but you have to look, anything highlighted in red is where it's going to differ because of the time. So as opposed to, 1 gallon per person per day of water for 3 days, now you're looking at a 2-week supply. And that's per person. So you have to start doing your math on that to make sure you're prepared. Same for your food. Again, 2-week supply at home as opposed to 3 days. And in those situations, you're probably going to want a can opener or something else as well, because if you're at home and you're sheltering at home because of an emergency, you're going to have other stuff that's available, most likely for you, unless your kitchen's been destroyed for some reason. Again, the flashlight, radio, all of those things, medication, again, thinking about the 2-week supply. And then again, now when on number 11, when you see cell phones, which we've already talked about in chargers, that's when I would consider, if it's for at home, you may want to have a few different external battery packs that you can have. Again, you're going to want to have, make sure you have some extra cash on hand to make sure that if you are going to be needing to go out and do that you have money available to you, because in certain emergency situations, there is not always cash that's available to you through a bank machine. The banks could be down. So you need to be thinking about having that as well. And then before, we talked about the emergency blanket in terms of the small one that you could have in your pack. But you also can be thinking about just some, other extra blankets that are at home. And you might be thinking, well, I already have a blanket because, I would have one upstairs, but you just don't know if you are facing a flood or something else. It's always good to have an emergency blanket that's packed in with your kit. And we talked before for the portable kits about the family specific items. Same thing again, the medical supplies, baby supplies, games and activities, and comfort items. You're just going to be changing this to 2 weeks instead of 3 days. So again, same for the pets. And again, you might say, oh, why am I going to need the carrier kennel? But you might need to confine your animal in your home to keep them safe based on what different kinds of emergency situation you are facing. And again, making sure that you have that pet food for at least 2 weeks and then water for at least 2 weeks. So when we're talking about water, lots of emergency situations, you're still going to have access to water and that won't be an issue. But in the event that you are in a situation where you're stuck at home and you don't have access to clean water, you can have a small container of bleach, of Clorox, and 5 drops of plain Clorox in a 2-liter bottle of water can make that water drinkable for you. So you would need a dropper to dispense the bleach, or also it's possible to get the Brita filtered water bottles. The filter is good for 1.5 to 2 months, and you can pour the water in there, and then that will do all the work for you and will filter it. But there's also lots of different things you can order, little packs for fresh water. So it's up to you, but it's just something to think about and to be considering in case you are in the position where you need to access fresh water and don't have it. So when we are talking about now the contents of your emergency kit for your car, this is the third type of kit that we're covering. Sometimes now, for example, in where we are in Belgium, it's by law you need to have a pack in your car where you have a brightly colored vest and a number of different things. So depending on where you are, you might have some sort of kit in your car. But there are a lot of other things that can go along with your kit that you may or may not have thought about. Some of the things we've already discussed, but going through them. So obviously water is essential to have in your car. You're not going to be driving around with gallons of water, but to have a water sourcing that is available for you is important. Snacks. Again, there's different snacks that you can look at that are small, that wouldn't be taking up a ton of room, that you can have in there, again, for yourself and for your children. A change of clothes. So, and again, thinking about seasonally, and this is the same for when you're thinking about your portable emergency kits, having a change of clothes in there in your portable emergency kit, but changing those up in the different seasons. So, in the summertime, hat and a sunscreen versus toques, mittens, and hand warmers for the winter. So when you're looking at your go bag and also looking at your car bag, it's really important for you to be looking at what season it is. And, if you're somewhere where there's not a huge variation in the weather, you might only want to change that up twice a year. But if you're in other places where, you do have the 4 seasons, you're going to need to be changing that, because you don't want to be going into your go bag and then you take it, or in your car bag, and you're stranded somewhere and it's the middle of winter and you have sunscreen and sunglasses and a hat. So make sure that you're changing those things up for the season. Number 4 is a tool to break a car window and cut a seatbelt. And I've got a little picture here on the side of that tool. And that's awesome. You can order that on Amazon. You can get them at hardware stores. You can get them all over. But if you ever were in an emergency situation, an accident of some sort, and your seatbelt's not coming undone, you can use the bottom part of that to cut the seatbelt, and you can break the window with that. So that's an awesome tool. It's inexpensive. Great thing to have in your emergency kit. Also, again, flashlights, small tools, a whistle is a really great thing to have in your emergency kit in the case that, you're in, it sounds a bit grim, but if we're in a ditch and you had an issue and, you couldn't call for help, having that whistle there. Oh, we've got snacks twice here, but snacks, again, they are important. A basic first aid kit. Again, in your car, those are easy to get. Emergency gloves. Duct tape, you wouldn't necessarily think you always need that, but that's a great thing to have in your home emergency kit as well. An emergency radio, external battery pack, wipes to sanitize yourself, but also to sanitize other areas if there's any kind of issue. Glow flares, which are required in some destinations. A poncho in case of rain or inclement weather. Again, a blanket, and then if you have children, a comfort item for your child. So when we look at this list, you might think, oh, this really seems like a long list. Why am I going to be driving around in my car with all of these things? But it is really important to think about that. So to give you an example, for, again, my example is Naples because we spent a lot of time there recently. But when we were there, they don't have a lot of shoulders on the road on the highway. It's just basically the two lanes. And so if something happens in between the two exits, you are stuck there. You're stuck and you can't get your vehicle off. And there are a number of times, the driving is quite interesting there. And there were a number of times when I was stranded there and there was bumper to bumper traffic and it was so bad that the emergency vehicles couldn't even get by. So they actually had cars that were ramming into other cars and pushing vehicles off to the side of the road to try to make room for the emergency vehicle to go through. And I have been stranded for 3 hours before there. And so when you're thinking about Italy, that is very hot. It is very hot there in the summer. In August, it's sweltering. It's above 30. It's crazy humid. And so now imagine you're stuck with your kids and you're in the car and you're stuck on the highway for 3 hours. It's crazy. That is definitely an emergency situation. You definitely need to have water. You would really like to have snacks. You need to be able to have those things. Definitely having something for your child if they're stressed and they're stuck in the car in the heat and there's no shoulder to get out of the car, to safely evacuate from your car. That can be a real potential situation that I know myself and many other people who have been posted in Italy have gone through that exact scenario. To really bring awareness that these situations do happen. You hope that they never happen, but in the event that something like that comes up, you want to make sure that you are prepared as possible. I know some people have raised the point before, I'm worried about having something in my car and my car getting broken into. There's different things you can try to do to keep that safe, keeping it in the back, keeping it covered. So just think about, you don't have to have it open where everybody can see it, but having something in there so that you really are prepared. So those are the three basic kits that it's really important to have. Again, it's not an exhaustive list. There are a lot of other things that people can put on there. And like, as I said before, we are going to send out this list for you to see. So the second thing that we really need to look at is making a plan. So creating an emergency response plan for yourself, if you're single, or for yourself and your partner, or for your family, whoever is living in your house is going to be part of your emergency response plan. And your family needs to know what to do in the event of an emergency. So that's the first step, is creating the plan. The second part of it, it's very, very important for you to be communicating the emergency response plan to every member of your family, because each person in your family needs to know what they need to do in the event of an emergency. So special considerations for your emergency response plan. Your emergency response plan is going to be completely unique, as I said, to your family, to your scenario, and to the people that you have living with you. So the first thing to think about are communication protocols. You need to identify who you need to contact in the event of an emergency. When you're in a community situation like this, even if you're not posted, and even if you're back in Canada and you're setting this up for yourself, think about single community members maybe that are living nearby you. Make sure that those people are considered, people who might not have a secondary person living in their home that would be checking on them. Establish a plan in case cell towers are not functioning. What are you going to do if your plan is to call your partner and you're not able to get in touch with them with a cell tower? Have a backup plan. If you have children, do you have a way of contacting them in case of an emergency? So if you have really young children, probably not. For ourselves, our children are 5 and 9, so they didn't have any cell phones, but we recently just got an emergency phone for our child, and we've set it up so it doesn't have the access to the apps or anything else, but she has access that if she needs to call us in the event of an emergency, they ride a bus, that they're able to contact us, as long as cells are functioning. Meeting points is another essential thing that you're going to need to consider. Establish meeting points both within the city or community and outside of, depending on the emergency you're facing. So maybe you're going to establish as part of your emergency plan, if you're talking about if there was a fire in the home, okay, what is our meeting point, for evacuating? Where's our meeting point outside? Also, if there's some sort of issue and, you just need to evacuate your home, but, one person is at work, someone's at home, where are you going to meet up? Or if there's some sort of bigger emergency and you need to evacuate out of the community that you're living in, where's your meeting point? Now, you'd have to check with the chain of command, but I know, and we'll touch upon this, but when we talk about the CanSafe plan, but I know that in Naples, for example, they have a CanSafe plan for where people are supposed to be evacuating to. So you need to be aware of if there's already a plan that's put into place, what is that plan, and making sure that you're considering that plan when you are speaking with your family about designing your personal family plan. So number 3 is evacuation routes. We really need to look at planning multiple evacuation routes out of the city, including one that avoids bridges or overpasses. This is particularly important if you live in an area where there's earthquakes, volcanoes, a lot of flooding or anything like that. And so, for example, in Naples, because they have a lot of volcanoes that are there and there is a high risk of earthquakes or of volcanic eruptions, there are also some of the roads are okay there. There's a lot of issues with road infrastructure as well. And there are a lot of bridges and overpasses. So if something happens and there's an earthquake and your evacuation route is going over an overpass, that's not going to work for you. So you need to be thinking of what are some different ways that I can get out of the city or get out of the area where I am, depending on where you're living. And then also when you're thinking of evacuation routes, think about just within your home, also planning fire escape route for your family so they can get out of the home. And this includes for your children, and thinking about, especially here in Belgium, a lot of people are living in multiple levels. So thinking about that as well and making a plan. So I touched on number 4, the CanSafe plan. Be informed of the Canadian Forces emergency plan for your location. So whoever the member is in the family should be able to speak to the chain of command, something that you can request more information on and be taking that into account. And also it's important to be looking at your city's community emergency plan. So sometimes, for example, again, a lot of my examples are Naples because I did a lot of work there with emergency preparedness, but each city would have its own plan in terms of if something happens, this is where we're evacuating to. So that's really important to be considering as well, is, okay, what is it at work? Whoever is the working person, maybe both people are working, for your work, where is your work? What is your plan there in terms of evacuation? What is the plan for if you have children in school, where will the school be evacuating your children to in the event of an emergency? What is the city plan? It's a lot of different information, but we need to be thinking about all of that, because in the event of some sort of emergency, the last thing you want to be doing is scrambling and trying to figure out, okay, my family is in all different places. How are we all getting back together? Know where everybody is supposed to go and then make your plan accordingly. So school emergency plan, we just talked about that. And the other thing to be looking at is also check with your school if the children will be released in the event of an emergency. Depending on what the emergency is, there might be a lockdown there. They might not release it. Depends where you are. You need to check as well. Many of us might live somewhere where there's an American school, and the DODEA schools have very clear policies for emergency preparedness. So check with the school. They have that information they can share with you. And looking at, will they be evacuated with teachers and students, or will they allow someone to go pick up the child? And on that note, number 7 is authorized adults. If you have children and you are not able to pick up your children in the event of an emergency, do you have an authorized adult who can pick them up? And has this been organized and approved by the school? And I know, for example, with ODEA schools, they're very strict. You need to have all of this in writing. I know the international school where our kids go, they need to have all of that set up in writing ahead of time. So don't wait for those things. Hopefully you never need to be using those plans, but in the event that you do, you'll have it prepared. So when we're talking about communicating and practicing the plan, the most important parts are to create, to communicate, and to practice. So the first step, obviously, creating the response plan. We've just talked about some of the considerations that you would need to have. If you're not communicating the plan with each member of the family, the plan's not going to be effective. All members in your family need to understand what the plan entails and what their specific role will be. And this is particularly important for children. You cannot, as most of you know, if you have children, you kind of sometimes you can tell them something and they might not hear it. You really need to be communicating this with them. And then the last step in that is practicing your plan with the family members, because when you practice it, you can identify potential weak points, but it also ensures that they're more familiar with the plan and more likely to remember it. And the Red Cross has a great in one of the training series that we took there, they had a great scenario that they shared with a young girl, and I believe she was probably only 7 or 8 years old. And they had an emergency response plan. Part of that was a fire escape plan, and there was a fire in their home, and she was able to evacuate in the home, stay calm, and she knew exactly what to do, and to help her mom evacuate herself and her younger sibling. And that was a child of 7 or 8 years old, and that's because she knew the plan and she had practiced the plan. And, kids are very, very resilient. I think sometimes far more resilient than we realize. And if they know what the plan is, they can then be more calm in that situation in order to take action. And that is super, super important in this situation. And, it might be something as simple as, making sure, okay, this is where our meeting point is, making sure you take your child to the meeting point. You show them where all of these things are, you practice, you can do little quizzes back and forth. Okay, in the event that you can't get a hold of mom or dad, who is it that you call? How are you going to call them? Where are you going to go? They're simple things, and we can stay calm. We don't need to talk about it in terms of a very scary thing, but just like we wear a rain jacket and prepare ourselves in case it rains, we create this emergency response plan in case we're ever faced with an emergency. So there's ways that we can speak about that where the kids can still get all the information they need, but not necessarily have that sense of fear about what's going on. So the number 3 that we're going to talk about here briefly is being informed. So getting connected with the right agencies and notification systems in your area, it's important to make sure that you can be notified in the event of a disaster or emergency. That's going to be different depending on where you're located. So my example here, we're in Brussels, so that's the example I have. So for us, we have the Canadian Forces Military Police Security Alerts. So we receive those via text message. There's a National Crisis Center for Belgium. So you need to check for the country that you're living in if there's something similar. And as part of the National Crisis Center, they have a Be Alert notification system. So we have one you can go on, you can register yourself, and then you can register where you're living, and then you can receive alerts, text messages on your phone. You choose how to receive it, but I chose text message. And then in the event of an emergency, they're going to text you if cell towers are up. So that's a great way to look at those different alert systems. I know for people that are in Naples, the US base that's there, the US support site, they have a service that they're doing there where you can sign up for the ad hoc alerts, and those are put out by their team there, and they'll put out anything from small things like the base gates being closed because of something, if there's any incident on the actual base, but also they would be putting out any alerts about earthquakes or volcanic activity or anything like that. So really it's important that you're looking at where am I living and do a bit of research to find out what kind of places you can get connected with that are reputable, places where you might be able to get some emergency information. And then, of course, your local radio is great if you are able to understand the local radio in the location where you are. So that is a lot of information that I've given you. I've also just put here, there's some further reading for just in general emergency response in Europe. I'm a huge fan of the Red Cross. And so there's the Red Cross EU, International Red Cross and Red Crescent Movement. You can visit their website to learn more. They have a lot of awesome free information that you can use to learn more about emergency preparedness and about the work that they do internationally. There's the European Commission, the European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations. They're there's some great information on there about what they're doing and what the potential issues are. And then again, with the European Commission, there's the Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Group, and you can learn all about the work that they do. But there is a lot of great information out there. And, when you're looking at preparing your kit, a big important thing for today to take away is that you have the steps now that you need to take, and you don't need to rush out and spend $500 buying all this stuff to get a back kit because something terrible is going to happen tomorrow. That's not the point. The point again is to be prepared in the event that something happens, and you can start building your kit bit by bit. You can work on your emergency plan. That won't cost you any money to work on your plan. You just need to sit down and talk and think those things through and decide as an individual or as a family. When it comes to your kit, you can start even the next time you go to the grocery store, picking up a few extra items to put in your emergency kit that you keep at home or to put in your portable emergency kits. You can do that every time you go shopping, so you're not incurring a huge expense all at once. There's lots of different things. If you feel that it's fine and I'd rather buy it, you can also go online and do your research and find, reputable organizations that sell these kits. So it's really up to you in terms of how you want to do that. But the important thing to remember is you have the information, you're empowered with the information to do the things you need to do to take the steps that you need in order to prepare yourself in the event that you do face an emergency or disaster. And then at the bottom here, I've got our shared email for Angela and I. And if we are going to be sending out the presentation, and if there is anything at all, any questions, we'll do question period now in a minute. But for those of you who are watching virtually afterwards, if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to reach out and contact me, and I would be happy to help you. And if I'm not able to answer your question, then I'd be happy to direct you to the right resources. If you would like, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm just reading over the chat here too. Margaret, I'm reading your... Oh, yes. Okay. So Margaret was talking about when she lived in the States, and, Margaret, it's a good point. She was saying, when she lived in the States, she had this, but not as much here. And, that is a really good point because, for myself, when I started working with the Red Cross, that was really the first time that I began to really think about things and get prepared. And it was crazy because I had grown up with, my father had always had all of the extra emergency food and all of these things at the house. And I remember him always telling me that, as an adult, you need to have these things and be able to stay in your house for this many days. And I honestly hadn't really thought a lot about it. And then the more that I worked with the Red Cross, I thought, oh my goodness, how could I have been alive on the earth for this many decades and not been prepared? Because you just don't always realize the potential situations you could face. So, but yes, but now so now you can be prepared. I was just reading through the questions here. Okay, and then Angela's sharing that the Petawawa MFRC used to have the seatbelt cutter window breakers. That is great. Yes, and good point from Margaret. She has mentioned here, if you have the tool, where would you keep it? In an accident, you might not have access to it. For your seatbelt cutter, I would keep that close to you, maybe in your glove compartment box or somewhere close by, and maybe even in your side, somewhere in the side door. Oh, well, that's great. So any other questions?
So I remember when someplace I was working at was trying to prepare emergency kits for the workplace and stuff. And the biggest issue that they were facing was like rotating like the perishables. I know they're non-perishables, but everything has like a best before date on it regardless. And that was kind of a big issue that they were facing, is how do they keep that stock fresh, or at least, fresher?
Yeah, that's a huge thing. So basically I would set up, how we have reminders on our phone or our computer. I would set up a reminder and just be going through there and checking that, and also looking at things with long expiry dates. So I know in Italy we had, I don't know why I like tuna. So there are these little bags that they sell at the American store that has tuna and crackers and a tiny little fork, and it was in there, but the expiry is super long on them. So something like that, I put in in there because I would eat it. You know, picking different things like that. I think I probably had some of the ravioli kind of things for the kids. So some of that has really long expiry, but it's looking at that and then checking your kit. You know, here we have, you know, in Italy, it's hot really all the time, you know, in Naples, except for a certain amount of the time of the year. So probably the clothes and the food, you know, might not be rotating quite as much, but yeah, definitely in some of the other locations, you just have to set a timer and then rotate it and try to look for things with a long expiry. And also things that you like eating. That was the other, the one good tip from my colleague, Martha. She said, I only buy stuff that I'm going to want to eat. And then if I see that the date is coming up and it's going to be going bad, I'm going to eat it because I like it anyways. And then I'm going to chuck a new one in from something. So she had a little system that she also had, her husband loved peanut butter, and you could get, this is like a very North American thing, but you could get squeezable peanut butter. And I know definitely they sell it at the commissaries and stuff, but something like that, you know, if it's starting to come due, everybody could easily eat peanut butter and, you know, do that if they like it. So yeah, that is a big thing, is taking care of that. But if you have food that you like, then you'll eat it anyways. And then you just use it up, and it's exhaustive. And especially I know in the US, we've got lots of friends in the US that are preppers, and they're so organized. They have all this going. So for some people, that's not anything new to them. But, you know, there are many of us who are outcan who don't have that necessarily prepared. And it's, yeah, it's easy to do. It just takes time and effort to sit down and do it and make sure that you don't put it off just in case you ever need it. So, well,
Nice.
I'm going to say thank you very much then. Again, if you're watching afterwards on a recording, please feel free to send me an email if you have any questions whatsoever. So merci tout le monde. Thank you for coming today. We look forward to connecting with you if you have any questions.